Don't be surprised, Washington DC's corridors and WhatsApp groups of political power have been abuzz about South Africa's army general talking geopolitics in Iran.
They both said, well, but people were not really surprised. Americans just shook their heads. They just shook their heads and went like, well, that's who the South Africans are.
All while US lawmakers and researchers deliberate over a fresh US-SA relations review bill in the works. And lobbying intensifies to possibly sanction state capture accused here at home.
His response to that was, well, you just look at the Zondo Commission. And we know there were 95 prominent ANC members mentioned in Zondo. Nothing has happened to any of those people. And he basically says, well, you just throw a dart and you could sanction any one of them.
But such bills rarely succeed in the States, argues News 24 specialist journalist Carol Payton in this Thursday edition of The Lead.
To know when the next episode drops, hit the like, follow, and subscribe buttons on our YouTube, Spotify, and Apple Podcast channels.
Got a voice note to share? Please send on to 072 562 3179. My name's Graham Robenheimer, so let's chat all this and more right here on The Lead on News 24. Some US lawmakers remain relentless in drafting new legislation that seeks to punish South Africa on a range of policy fronts. They go further than the measures already brought by the second Trump administration. Well, the latest bilateral relations review bill, sponsored by a Texas Republican Congressman, Ronnie Jackson, will need plenty of support, though, to make it past both legislative houses in the states. One of Jackson's bill's biggest advocates is the Hudson Institute's Joshua Meservey, whom our specialist News 24 journalist Carol Payton is in fact spoken to and had an interview. She joins me now in our Cape Town studios to relay exactly what she's learned in her discussions with him, taking us, if you will, into the corridors of Washington, D.C. Carol, thank you so much. I love having you back on The Lead.
Oh, thanks, Graham. I love being here.
A bit of a difficult story because us as South Africans, we've got a complex democracy, but the US democracy is always something that I've struggled to understand. So you're going to help me out a little bit today. Let's begin with this before we discuss this latest attempt. How many previously, to your knowledge, bills were put forward to review US-SA relations in general, and they haven't really succeeded, right?
Right. There have been two that I'm aware of. The most well-known one was a bill by John James, I think it was last year, and that bill did get past the Congress, but it didn't actually make it into the Senate. And there was a previous one, I think, which focused on anti-Semitism, but that one didn't really get any further. But I think this one is particularly interesting because it's the first time that there's a suggestion that ANC leaders and government and South African government officials could be sanctioned.
Take us through the legislative process. Which house does it go to first and gets drafted, and then what does it need to pass after that, which is the Senate, I think, and then what? Then it goes to the president's desk, right? What
happens is that it's been drafted and it's gone through the committee. So the first stage is the committee, the Foreign Affairs Committee, passed this bill, but I think it was the vote was 16 to 34. Now, what's interesting there is that it means that it had bipartisan support. So 6 Democrats from that committee voted with the Republicans, and that is very significant. The other Republicans on the committee did put up a very good fight and did make all the arguments, but at the end of the day, it passed by a large majority. So it's done that. Now what happens next is that it has to get introduced onto the floor of the Congress. Now this is more difficult because that's why, you always see in these American TV shows
The West Wing.
The West Wing and all of that stuff.
House of Cards.
You see people talking about their bills and having to get support for the bill. So that's what has to happen now. To get it into Congress, onto the Congress floor, this congressman, Ronnie Jackson, has to really lobby very, very hard. And so if he gets it in there, the consensus is it'll pass. Not only because the Republicans all support it, but also there are clearly some Democrats who are going to go with it. But that's not enough. After that, it goes to the Senate. And this is where they say, this is where bills go to die. Bills go to the Senate, and the reason is because the Senate is much more discerning about what priorities it's going to look at. It can't look at everything. Congressmen are just drafting legislation all the time and trying to get support for it. And so the bigger pieces of legislation, the ones that are sponsored by the party rather than just a standalone piece of legislation, have a way better chance. So that's why the previous bill didn't make it into the Senate. Not because it didn't pass the Senate, but it didn't even get introduced into the Senate. Now this is the same problem. This bill is going to face the same problem because the senators are generally more serious and more discerning and are not going to be necessarily prioritizing it, even if the majority of them agree.
The Senate is meant to be the comparison of our National Assembly. Would you describe it as such?
No, I think the House of Representatives is more similar to our National Assembly.
Okay.
But the Senate and the National Council of Provinces aren't really comparable.
That's where I was trying to.
So
I was confused a little.
It's a different system.
Completely. Okay, so there's this new review bill on the table. You're saying if it gets enough support and finds its way to Senate and passes that extreme or strict discerning attitude that's sort of held there, it could bring a range of measures against and sanctions against certain individuals, and we're going to get to that in a second. But I thought let's first find out who this particular think tank policy expert Joshua Mazurvi is. You had an interview with him. He's shown you given you a lot more context, if you will. Who is he? Who does he represent? Is he progressive? Is he conservative? What did you learn?
Right. So the reason I interviewed him is because he has been very prominent in this debate, and he's hosted South African delegations, and he's hosted people speaking on this topic. And he is an advocate, a very strong advocate of sanctions on individual ANC leaders. He thinks that this is the way to go. So he's a conservative. He hooks up with, the kind of conservatives in the Republican Party, and is clearly hooking up with conservative and conservative liberal people here in South Africa. So that's who he is. He's a research fellow, so he kind of does, it's a think tank. Hudson Institute's a think tank. It's a reputable think tank. It's a conservative think tank. So it produces research and it hosts events, and and it's part of the whole sort of ecosystem of DC, where you have all of these think tanks and lobbyists and all politicians and everyone kind of in the fray. And so he's been very prominent in that. So that's the reason for interviewing him.
A lot of political window dressing, would you say? Because he's not a lawmaker, right?
He's not a lawmaker, but the thing is that these institutes are influential in American politics. And so he's not a lawmaker, but clearly he's close to the lawmakers. And I didn't quiz him on exactly his role in drafting the bill. I doubt he would have needed to do that or done that. But certainly he's a strong advocate for it.
And he's looking now at Jackson's sponsored bill, and he's going, it would be really nice if we could give this bill some teeth and essentially go and sanction certain people in South Africa. Under which legislation is he doing this, is my question to you, because that I think is super interesting,
right,
with its Russian connections. Explain that to us,
yes,
Carol.
No, that's very interesting. So the bill actually says, what must happen is that the executive must do an investigation and produce a report and decide if there are any South African government officials or ANC politicians who should be sanctioned under the Magnitsky Act. Now, Sergei Magnitsky was a Russian lawyer who died in prison, and this happened sort of in the sort of 20. I think it was about 2012 or so that he died. Maybe it was earlier. Sorry, I don't know that date. Anyway, this piece of legislation was actually drawn up to specifically target individual sanctions on Russian politicians and Russian oligarchs. So during that sort of privatization process in Russia, there was a lot of corruption and very violent corruption. And the Americans, as they do, feel that they should be involved in everything, decided that they should have a piece of legislation that gives them the teeth to sanction these oligarchs. And it's been very effective. I mean, these oligarchs have been chased around the world with their yachts, trying to hide their yachts away from the US Treasury. So, that's where it comes from. So they're thinking that, this could be applied to South Africans as well.
Sure. So who are these South Africans? Because Joshua has met with, and maybe let's begin with this. He's met with a wide array of notable South African figures, not just people within President Cyril Ramaphosa's administration, also DA members and other groups. Who are we talking about here?
He's met all these lobby groups that have been going over to Washington, Solidarity, AfriForum, the DA were there. There've been several not official, but several sort of unofficial, prominent business people who've been over there, and obviously then there've been the government delegation. So he is, he has been a regular port of call for all of these delegations. And when I spoke to the Solidarity guys about, where did this idea, because they support the idea of targeted sanctions, where did this come from? They say, no, this was suggested to them. This wasn't an idea they came up with themselves, but they strongly support it.
Not sure if I buy that, all in all. To be a fly on the wall of these particular meetings in Washington, D.C.
Okay, you said what? Yes.
Now, here's the cream, is that essentially Joshua is saying what? That the Zondo Commission recommendations back home here in South Africa is what, the blueprint for particular individual sanctions to be brought against certain notable figures in South Africa. Is that right?
Yeah. So the big question then is, well, who gets sanctioned? Who are you going to sanction? Are you going to sanction the president? Who are you going to sanction? And his response to that was, well, you just look at the Zondo Commission. And we know there were 95 prominent ANC members mentioned in Zondo. Nothing has happened to any of those people. And he basically says, well, you just throw a dart and you could sanction any one of them. So there are lots of people on that list. And that's, and he says that, for him, that would be reason enough. And they don't have to, it's unlike a court of law. They don't have to have a finding against somebody. They don't have to have a corruption finding in a court of law to say, okay, we're going to sanction, Nomvula Mokonyane or Gwede Mantashe or whoever. They can just decide that, they meet criteria of the Act and put them on the list. So that's what he suggests. I think, the Solidarity guys have suggested, or they seem to think, and I guess they would have pushed this as well, is that, the sanctions start with those people who sing "Kill the Boer." They would like to see those people punished, and I think that very likely it's, if sanctions do materialize, I don't think that, I think Julius Malema would not be able to escape.
You're listening to the latest edition of The Lead on News 24 with Graham Rowenheimer. If you've got an opinion on what you've heard so far, drop us a short voice note on our WhatsApp hotline. That's 072-562-3179.
Welcome back. You're listening to News 24's definitive audio and video podcast, The Lead, with your host, myself, Graham Robenheimer, in conversation with our senior specialist, journalist, writer at large, Carol Payton, taking us to the whisperings heard in the corridors of Washington, D.C. regarding future US-SA trade relations and whether or not, from a US standpoint, that could be changed legislatively. We're picking up with the conversation regarding Julius Malema and the singing of Dubula Ubuna. While the US's big ally, historically, the United Kingdom has already stopped Malema from entering its domicile.
That's right.
Stopping him from having a visa to go over. So there's already some international precedent there, if you will. Okay. I find it fascinating that this particular researcher, think tank, policy expert, knows, about the Zondo Commission's findings and all of that, and that would suggest to me that he's had robust discussions, and you've shown that with various different South Africans. How probable is it to get something like this over the line, Carol?
Well, it's hard. And as I said in the beginning, you've got to get it into the Senate. And if you can't get it into the Senate, and that's not a question of whether the majority of the Senate would agree with it or not, because they probably would. Is it a priority? Is it a top priority? And these guys have got Gaza, they've got, Ukraine, they've got Russia, they've got all their own legislative program. Trump has been very active in all sorts of legislation that he's championing. So
our pit stops already been, Ramaphosa's already been in the White House, etc.
Yeah. And there is an argument to be made, which is that, this bill shouldn't really be a priority because South Africa's already been punished. Aid's already been withdrawn. We've already publicly, humiliated them, highlighted it.
No new US trade deal.
Yeah, we've got a high tariff placed on us. We definitely will get thrown out of AGOA. And there's the whole refugee program for Afrikaner.
So-called refugees
Afrikaners who feel they've been persecuted. So there's a lot that's already being done to harm South Africa. So there is an argument to say, well, this is not the priority. So I think the general consensus is that it's not going to make it, not going to make the cut. But the problem is that if Trump decides that this should be done, then just looking at the way the Republican Party is working, has been working these past 8 months, if Trump says it should happen, it will happen. So, and he's we don't know. He's unpredictable. Someone suggested to me that he could also just make an executive order anyway. And bypass the Senate entirely, and that would be that. So I do think that South Africa's really skating on thin ice, and we are paying for the fact that, well, obviously, number one, we're paying for the fact that we have this so-called non-aligned position in foreign affairs, which is in fact not non-aligned because we have all sorts of friendships with what America calls malign actors or malign characters. So that's a problem. And then
on that note, Carol, what was the reaction, to obviously very explosive visit, many questions being asked about SANDF General, our chief, Rudzani Mapwanya, jetting off to meet his Iranian counterpart in Tehran. What was that response, to your knowledge, in Washington?
Well, I'm told that it raced around Washington. You know how things race around here on WhatsApp. Well, similar situation with all these lobby groups and interest groups and so on. Interestingly, both Mercive and one of our South African diplomats in the embassy there both said to me the same thing. They both said, well, but people were not really surprised. Americans just shook their heads. They just shook their heads and went like, well, that's who the South Africans are. I asked our South African embassy official, well, would it help if President Ramaphosa acted against Mapwanya? And he said, no, we were not considered to be on the path of correction. And so until we are on the path of correction, Americans are just going to shake their heads. I mean, the sentiment in Washington against South Africa is extremely negative. The problem is the few and far between people who are going to stand up and defend it. And it's hard to defend. I mean, even the Democrats who put up such a good fight in that committee meeting, they have to concede. We don't agree. We don't agree that South Africa goes to Iran and, has calls with Hamas and,
after US missiles have struck key nuclear sites in Iran.
etc. After, they've had a war with Iran.
Because the US government wants answers or wants clarification, wants to understand this trip now, right?
Well, I don't know if they've even bothered with that. I mean, I guess we don't have an ambassador, so they can't they can't go and, order the ambassador to come and explain. And I don't think, from what I gathered, it's like, oh, well, that's who they are. We're not, answers.
That ship has sailed.
On
a foreign policy stance.
I mean, and I think what they would really, we don't have answers ourselves as South Africans. We still don't know. We still don't know why this was considered a good idea. We got, the defense minister saying that, well, she doesn't think it was such a bad thing. But he did speak politics, and the head of the army is supposed to be strictly apolitical.
I feel like, I'm going to be very honest here, when I first saw the Government of National Unity form, I knew that there was going to be a bit of dwang down the line when it comes to foreign policy stance, because the DA and the ANC don't see eye to eye whatsoever. And it was inevitable that we were going to get into this space. Maybe not with all the colorings of the lines that we see it as it is now, right? But I always foresaw this.
No, it was inevitable. And the thing is that this has been happening for, it's been 2 years that we've been in this fraught situation with America, where they've been calling and saying, what's going on. There was the Lady R thing, and then following the Lady R thing, or the Ukraine anniversary of the invasion, South Africa has war games with Russia. We got what we asked for, I think. And I don't think it's possible in today's world, which is so polarized, to be sort of non-aligned, if actually really non-aligned means having friendly relationships with both sides. I don't think either side is up for that.
It's very interesting. Moment in history. What would, and help me out here, Carol, you would know, what would targeted sanctions on certain individuals mean for South Africa's economy? Look, what that's been touted, it's not necessarily like a blanket sanction, don't do business with South Africa outright, but I can't imagine that the markets would love the idea of US sanctions against individuals anyway, because that's negative headlines, and none of the ratings agencies would like that.
Well, as you know, we're trying to get off the grey list, and an enormous amount of work has been done to try and get us off the grey list.
A lot of quick work as well.
The problem with the grey list is that it sort of has puts a risk premium on South Africa. And then it also requires, let's say, banks and any financial transaction that's done with a South African bank requires an extra level of due diligence. And that for banks and for companies is expensive and slows things down. So a similar thing, this would have a similar effect in the sense that, yes, only individuals are targeted. So those individuals who are named will not be able to visit the US, and they will not be able to do transactions in dollars. So they are severely circumscribed, just given that the dollar is the international reserve currency. But the impact is also that when dealing with South Africa, then US and European and UK, Canada companies have to be sure that they're not dealing with a sanctioned person along the way. So that requires an extra level of due diligence. And in Zimbabwe, what happened is that, international banks just said, well, we're not going to do business with Zimbabwe. It's too much of a hassle. We don't know, there's a high risk, and the extra due diligence is expensive. So we're not going to do it. And that would be a really serious blow for us.
I always think about this very interesting, historical factoid when it comes to since 1994 historical US-South Africa relations, is that former president, the late Nelson Mandela, was always on the terrorist watch list put out by the United States, I think until 2008 or somewhere thereabouts, and that's previously from the Reagan and Thatcher era. And I always find that super fascinating. Look how long it took.
And And the fact that, during apartheid, where, at the height of apartheid, where people were literally getting, shot in the streets by the army, the rest of the Western world imposed sanctions on South Africa, and the US were the very, very last to come to the party.
They really ummed and ahed a lot, yeah.
And those
Thatcher.
sanctions were decisive. They were decisive in ending apartheid. There were different sanctions. Those were sort of, the whole country was sanctioned. But they were very slow, the Americans. So they have not got a good record. And the sort of scary thing is that they don't care, most of them.
Okay, let's tie this up with a nice big Carol Payton supplied bow, if we will. What's your biggest takeaway from this discussion, peeking a little bit into Washington and, the probability of something like this sort of coming to light? Just your final sort of take on all of this, Carol.
Well, the thing that I don't have a view on yet, but the thing that I really wonder about then is, okay, what do we do next? Or are we actually, as a country, by default, are we pivoting away from America? Is that what's happening here? And what would that mean if that is the case? All our trade relations are with America and Europe. So what is it, that big question of where do we go? Where do we go from here? How do we pivot? Do we pivot? What does that mean politically? Those are big, big questions. And the world is a complex place, a highly politicized and polarized place. And we're a little, raft in the ocean, getting tossed about. And we're not doing a very good job.
Yeah, I wonder if we're not going to sort of like wake up one day and go, oh, well, such a big decision's been made, and then go, well, yeah, the writing's been on the wall for such a long time. I worry about that.
We're kind of drifting, and where are we drifting to? We're not sure.
Can I tell you, there's certain people that only tune into the lead to listen to you, Carol. I'm telling you that right now. It's a little compliment to put a pep in your step as you move into the weekend. How does that sound?
Thanks, Graham. I'm sure it's you they're listening to, but thank you.
Absolutely not. Quote unquote, so obvious. Which ANC leaders would be targeted for sanctions, says US Bill Champion, written by News 24 specialist writer at large, Carol Payton. Thank you so much. I really appreciate every second you give to the lead. I love it. Thank you.
Thanks, Graham.
Listen Up is News 24's sharp new podcast, where hosts Tim Cohen and Mark Barnes cut through the clutter with bold takes and unfiltered insight.
They're not fighting for the good of South Africa. And so this is degenerated into a series of tit-for-tat spats. How's that for a bit of poetry early in the morning?
Smart, punchy, and unapologetically real.
President Ramaphosa has explained why he did it, and the reason he did it was because he said that people weren't allowed to go to America, and then Andrew Whitfield did, and then there's a dispute about whether or not he asked.
Catch new episodes of Listen Up every Tuesday on News 24 or wherever you get your podcasts.
I know a lot about this. Not really.
Yeah,
but
there we go.
Here goes.
You can be the accused for a change. Yeah.
Buying a car? Let driving with J9 steer you right.
The reason why I wanted you in today is because I want to talk about car sales. You were in that space for a few years as a salesman.
News 24's motoring podcast, hosted by Janine van der Post, delivers sharp car advice, expert test drives.
Nowadays, when somebody, for the most part, when somebody walks into a dealership, they know sometimes more about the car than the salesperson does because of the access to information.
Yeah. The latest trends and motorsport interviews, all in one smooth ride.
But I mean, these are basic questions that people really need to know. And I think at the end of the day, you just really need to do your homework.
Catch Driving with J9 on News 24 or wherever you get your podcasts.
This is Bruce Whitfield's Business Week. It's powered by Capitec, the business bank for everyone. It's business without the boring bits. Each week we share with you just what you need to know to help you understand and better navigate a deeply complex and really confusing and uncertain world. A weekly wrap of the most important stories from the world of business, money and finance on News 24.
New episodes of The Lead air Monday through Thursday at 7 p.m.
On this Thursday edition of The Lead, we end off with On This Day in History, the 21st of August 1998. George Magistrate Victor Lugaju found former president of the apartheid era P.W. Botha guilty of contempt for repeatedly ignoring subpoenas to testify in public before the country's Truth and Reconciliation Commission, the body responsible for investigating human rights abuses committed during the apartheid era. Botha was fined some 10,000 rand, was given a 1-year prison sentence, suspended some time for 5 years, which could be brought into effect if he had defied another TRC subpoena. The TRC wanted to question Botha about human rights abuses perpetrated by security forces during that era, as he chaired the State Security Council from 1978 to 1989. Botha had already been named in amnesty applications by former Law and Order Minister Adrian Vlok and former Vlakplaas Commander Eugene de Kock as having directly ordered murders, bombings and torture of anti-apartheid activists. Botha denied having given any such order in the written responses to the Commission, despite the fact that the TRC had concluded its information gathering phase in July. Another subpoena for Botha was to follow from the Amnesty Committee then. That's On This Day in History, the 21st of August 1998, courtesy the database South African History Online. Thanks to them. It's going to be an action-packed episode of Bruce Woodfield's Business Week. Lots to talk about there. And then I thought I'd highlight our next new project at News 24 Sport, the Rugby Championship Guide. Look out for Inside Pass podcast with sports editor Lloyd Bernard and company ahead of the Springboks versus Australia, the second test happening this weekend at Cape Town Stadium. Where you're going to be watching the game, let us know. Drop us a voice note if you'd like. Do you think we've got what it takes to overcome the Wallabies after that upset at Ellis Park of the weekend past? Let us know what you think there. I really couldn't believe the scenes from the second half. I thought I was watching a different rugby game. That WhatsApp line number again is 072 562 3179. Hit the follow and subscribe buttons. Like our show on Spotify, Apple and YouTube, and that way you can get notified of our next editions. Well, on to the next week. Did you hear that the Madlanga inquiry is due to start on the 1st of September? Expect rolling coverage right here on The Lead on News 24. My name's Graham Robinheim, and so long as there's news, we'll always have The Lead.